Hi, this is Dustin Pickering, and I'm your host today for the Parrot Literary Corner. Today we have Annette Tarpley, who is from Virginia, and she works as a nurse practitioner by day and poet by night. She recently rekindled and has been writing with fervor. 40-year nursing career has aided her in some of her pieces, which include the subject of domestic violence and all aspects of crime and violence. For had she cared for hundreds of victims of crime and violence, working as a forensic nurse examiner for 15 years. In the Facebook poetry community, she has received numerous accolades and awards, including featured poet, poem of the day, poem of the month, honored twice for Poet of the Year 2020, and several poems published on online poetry sites. She has received numerous professional critiques. She's taken part and contributed to several anthologies. She has a debut book of poetry called Poetry Potpourri. It's comprised of 110 poems. She's also co-authored poems and Ted Huntington's book, Uplifting, Two Hearts, a Poetry Collection, is a book co-authored with Sarfraz Ahmed. Annette has written the foreword and poems for the anthology Feminist Voices, Volume 2, dedicated to domestic violence victims. Through Sparrow Poetry, videos have been created to highlight her poetry, which she has recited, and a playlist can be found on YouTube. She lends her voice for other poetic recitations. Annette is also the founder and administrator of The Passion of Poetry, with over 6,000 members on Facebook in a brief span of time. Fall of 2020 and spring of 2021, she was featured and published in a Bangladeshi newspaper / magazine multiple times. December 2020, she served as moderator for a Europe America English poetry reading online forum event presented by Progressive Literary and Cultural Society. She's also been featured in several live interviews, and her poetry is known internationally. So thank you for joining us today, Annette. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. So my first question is, what's the poetry scene there like in Virginia where you're at, and has COVID affected it in any way?
Well, COVID certainly affected me as far as the poetry scene because it gave me some ample opportunity to delve into it. But that's one of my pet peeves is I really am not finding that there's a huge poetry community, at least locally, and I feel like other countries actually have a larger passion or following of poetry. So I actually would like to get it jump started here somehow. I'm just still trying to figure it out. So
there's not much of is it there's not an interest, or is that there's just not an organization?
yeah, I don't think if there's an organization. I've thought, and I still want to somehow contact maybe some professors, English professors that are locally at some of the colleges and see if I can get something started, but it's kind of on my bucket list of things to do.
Right. So good luck with that. And I'm just curious, I asked this is kind of a general question I've asked a few other people we've hosted. Where do you see yourself in, say, 5 years as a poet? And if you're going to get into organizing, where do you see yourself there?
Well, hopefully it'll even, I'll be more involved. I'm so involved currently, especially through my group, The Passion of Poetry. We're currently working on our first anthology. So I mean, it consumes my time. I work full time, and any off time I have is pretty much consumed in the poetry community. But I certainly will like to have had more books published by then. I have some things that are underway. And I certainly would like to be more actively involved in promoting other poets as well. One of my goals I would like to do is somehow come up with a website where I can publish other poets, but I don't know how to do that. So I haven't figured it out yet. So that's kind of where I see myself is not just growing in my own poetry, but also helping others as well.
Right. I would suggest, as far as websites, there's WordPress.org and
Yeah, you know what? I signed up for that and I paid a fee and I can't figure it out all the way. So I'm a little compromised that way. I go on it every few days. I'll go
yeah,
back to it and I still
it's a
can't.
little tricky. It can be a
Yeah,
little, yeah, there's a lot of difficulty. It's sort of it's very different from just typing something into a website.
we might have to get together later. I might have to tap into your knowledge if you have any. So,
It
you
takes a
know.
little time to get used to. So I had a quote
I'm sorry, that sound effects by my hairy daughter, which
brought to you by the puppies of your household. We've got sound effects here, and we've got our the emperor wears no clothes behind us here because my screen is not acting properly, and so everyone's learning the secrets of
hold on just a
the
second.
craft. Okay,
Sadie, no barking. That might do it. We'll see.
we'll see what happens. We're having kind of a little bit of a chaos going on around us today. But I was going to read a quote from Mary Oliver, and I think she seems like your kind of poet. And the quote is, figurative language can give shape to the difficult and the painful. It can make visible and felt that which is invisible and unfeelable. And I wonder, do you see your poetry accomplishing that? And are there poets who achieve that for you that you enjoy reading, whether they're contemporary or, from the.
Mhm. And give me the main cue line. I'm sorry, I was distracted by the other entity in my house.
I got
So
you. I got you. That's okay. Well, it says figurative language can give shape to the difficult and the painful. It can make visible and felt that which is invisible and unfeelable. And what I
yeah.
was asking is, what do you see in your poetry? Do you see it doing that? And are there poets who achieve this for you that you enjoy reading?
There are, I haven't read a huge, vast amount of poetry, to be
Mhm.
perfectly honest. I've always kind of had a poet and writer in me. My first poem, it wasn't my first poem, but my first poem that became well known was years ago after the death of my dad and brother. And so I wrote a poem. And so it's been years since I've really written since then. And then I went through a divorce about 4 years ago, and then poetry came out again. So I have my ex-husband to thank for my poetry career, actually, because that kind of got me back into it. And it was that poem that I recited many times. It's 3 minutes long. It's the only one I know by heart. That actually people kept saying you need to get it published, and I finally did. There's a
Mhm.
lot of current poets that I know through the Facebook community that I really love. Sarfraz Ahmad, who I co-wrote the book with. There's also a very good friend of mine called Jill Sharon Kimmelman, who's an excellent American poetess and has a different style than mine. I also have a administrator on my site called Dennis Brown, and we have very, very similar styles. And so, but my poetry isn't always and I don't even know if that's one of your questions, but I tap into several different things. I do a lot of fictionalized writing.
Mhm.
So yeah, people think it's about me, and it's not always about me.
Right.
I do a lot of picture prompts, or you can give me a title. I mean, I write, of course, on other things as well, but I am usually very quick with my writing. It's not usually something I mull over or think
Mhm.
over. I just kind of boom, I just start it and it goes somewhere. So it's very different style of writing,
Right.
I guess.
So would you say it's very spontaneous for you to write?
Very,
Yeah.
yeah, very spontaneous, very fast. Don't, because some poets and writers I talk to, they'll say that they'll mull over it for a few days, and
Mhm.
I'm kind of like, bam, I'll reread it and things like that, but I just kind of spill it out, and it is what it is.
Right.
So
One of the poems you shared with us was called "The Ballad of Ned." Is that a true story, or is that something you just and
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah.
What were you trying to say there? It's a very interesting poem.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites actually.
Hmm.
And it's actually about bullying.
Right.
So, and that came from a picture prompt. It was a picture prompt from Global Ink website on Facebook, and it showed a picture of a man, and you could see like part of his face, or it was kind of just things were distorted. So I took that picture prompt and I did the Ballad of Ned, which has been published in an online magazine. It's received critiques. Actually, it was kind of a contest, the picture prompt, and I lost to a haiku.
Oh,
So
wow.
I was like shocked. I thought the Ballad of Ned lost over a haiku, but I've been told by many people it could be a story, or it could be a song, or it could be,
It does have a very story-like appeal to it.
yeah, yeah.
So you
And
could give us kind of an idea of what it's about for those who haven't read it.
yeah, so it's about bullying, and it's
Mhm.
about a man who's has a distorted, has a deformity, and he gets teased and taunted. I was bullied quite a bit actually as a child, so I'm very, of course, anti-bullying. And so I just kind of and I do a lot of stories like Ned. I've listened to several different poets talk about their poetry, and I can do something from the deep within, and it can be about me, but I really do a lot of fictionalized stuff, and I like to do that because I like to tell stories and just kind of go somewhere and take somebody with me on the trip. So I really do a lot of storytelling. I enjoy it a lot, actually. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Would you like to share a piece with us?
Do you want me to do the Ballad of Ned?
Sure. That's one that I think you're passionate about, and I think our viewers would like to hear it.
Yeah, and I got a couple. Also have one called Message in a Bottle that's
Hmm.
just got done. Actually, Alan Johnson, who's a great narrator, he put it together and did the narration and video, and wrote the music to go with it. It's beautiful. It's on YouTube. But we'll do the Ballad of Ned. Um, Long ago, and oh so far away in the deep throes of the South, lived a man named Ned, a gentle soul, born with a deformity of the mouth. Through the years, it's been said that his mama sheltered him from harm. He grew up caring for the land and animals on an old country farm. Then the time came for him to go off to school, an atmosphere of unrest. His mama packed his lunch, walked him to the bus, and whispered, "Mama loves you best." The children teased and taunted him. They were mean and downright cruel. He was bullied all day, but nothing was done. The school had no set rules. After school, he would walk home alone, tears streaming down his face. When he finally got home, Mama wiped away his tears, greeting him with a warm embrace. She said, "Son, I declare I taught you better. I told you you're covered with armor. You're protected in blood. You're a child of God. You're not merely the son of a farmer." The next day he went to school. He stood up taller, a confident smile on his face. He went to the front of the class, approached the chalkboard in the writings he began to erase. With the chalk he wrote, "God is love. I am love, and my love I extend to you." Tears rushed down the teacher's face, falling down the cheeks of students too. From that day forward, no one bullied this sweet and young disfigured Ned. He was blessed with a life of love and always remembered the words his mother said. So that is the Ballad of Ned.
Excellent. And it has a positive moral, and I think for both people who are victims of bullying and people who do bully, you
Yeah,
learn there's the positive aspect to that poem, and it has a very steady rhythm and a rhyme scheme that's easy to adapt in your mind, and you can kind of connect with it as well as
yeah.
hearing it. It's a very nice poem.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you for sharing that. If you want to share another one with us, feel free.
Okay. Well, I think I will. Do you want one about me, or do you want another story? What would you like?
let's do something a little different. Let's do one about you.
Okay, I'm gonna do the mosaics of my mind.
Okay.
In the mosaics of my mind are times both good and sad, times when I have rejoiced, thankful for what I had, as bits and pieces of my life that have made me who I am. They lay out creating a work of art, my story's diagram. In the mosaics of my mind, there are moments of gloom, steadfast in my faith, my situations did not consume. For I always kept in mind that this too will eventually pass. I was strong in constitution, not fragile like broken glass. In the mosaics of my mind, I knew who I would become, a woman who could withstand storms, my eyes on the rising sun. I'm capable of compassion. I can feel another's pain. I can find joy in another's happiness in what in life they gain. In the mosaics of my mind, I abhor prejudice and hate. I believe one has control over their destiny and fate. Never one to like toxicity. I prefer a harmonious life, one that I can happily enjoy, not laden with burden and strife. In the mosaics of my mind, I'm content in who I have become. I want to positively impact another's life before each day is done. I want to live each day to its fullest, something new each day to find. I want others to finally remember me when it becomes the end of my time. So that is the mosaics of my mind.
Excellent. Thanks. That is a very personal poem, and I think it speaks volumes for people, can relate to that very deeply. I suspect that people will have a positive reaction to the poem. Thank you for sharing that. So do you have any interesting stories about creating poetry? You obviously you've had a lot of experience with, survivors and people who've been through violent situations, and you come home and you say, you write poetry when you return home, you sit down and that's what you're committed to. Do you have any interesting stories about that entire process?
Well, I don't actually always come home and write my poetry. I do
Okay.
a lot of windshield poetry, what I call it. I write a lot in my car. Not that I don't, I probably write more at home.
Not driving though, right?
I'm not driving. No. I'm not that talented or stupid. I should say.
Multitasking,
Yeah. No, I usually
Talented,
pull
stupid.
over. Yeah, I'm somewhere and because I work kind of like on the road, I'm off, somewhere, and then something will come to my mind, or, I'll come up with a title and a thought. So I'll just pull over and so yeah, I do a lot of that. I've written, I've written a lot on domestic violence. One time I wrote one on a sexual assault, and I did it in first person. And I ended up having to put a disclaimer on it because people were like, oh my gosh, Annette, I'm so sorry that happened to you.
Mhm.
And I guess I made it real enough to where they really thought it was about me, but it wasn't. But I really, and I write any time of day. At night is usually my more lucid time, but in the morning I occasionally write as well. It doesn't matter. It just comes. I write daily, actually, so I'm pretty prolific. Yeah.
Good habit. It's
Yeah.
very good to keep
I
writing
feel.
every day.
Yeah, I feel that if I don't, I don't feel complete. My day is complete unless I've written something, and yeah. So because when I started to work on my first book, Poetry Potpourri, it was like last February or end of February. And she said, how many poems do you have? And I said, I don't know, like 20. And she said, well, a good poetry book should contain 10 or 60. And so I ended up writing like every day and wrote like 110, poems for the book. So most of them were new. I had a few that weren't, but most of them were new.
Interesting. And so it's a daily process, it's a discipline for you to sit down and write. And do you feel compelled, or is it like just a matter of we should sit down and write today, and you kind of go through a routine, or
it's kind of like a obsession, I tend to, whatever I'm involved in at the moment, I tend to just throw myself into it. I made jewelry for a long time, for a few years, and that's what I would do. I call at my Xanax, doing some, either, making jewelry, or, keeping this and this busy doing something, because I used to do psychiatry for a little bit of time. And I used to tell my patients, anxiety is energy, and you can use it self-destructively to get anxious and have a panic attack, or you can take the same energy and funnel it into something positive. Like, so I said, get a hobby, do something creative, whatever it is, and then you can take that same energy and move it into positive means. But not everybody can do that. But I had quite a few. Had one patient who became marvelous at jewelry making, and did very well. Yeah.
Interesting. I think, and I definitely agree with you that anxiety is an energy, and it can be a very compulsive energy, and you can channel it, as you say, from either into something bad like an addiction, or destructive behaviors like going out and causing problems for people, or you could do something more that more fulfilling, that would engage you with your mind and encourage you to to think. I think that's a good observation. And I wonder, do you have any advice for someone who would want to approach things that way, but maybe is having a little trouble with that as far as writing is concerned?
They're beginning to write, they're having issues with it.
Yeah.
I would say to read more. And I haven't done a lot of it myself. I kind of have my own swag, and sometimes I change my styles up. As you saw, the stuff that most of that stuff is rhyming, but I'll do non-rhyming things as well. And so what I would say is and actually the Facebook poetry community is a good place to go, because people have so many different styles. And then of course to read, the people who are the classics. Get one of those books that has the top whatever poets, US poets or whomever, and things like that. But I think that, because I have a lot of people come to me and say, help me write, and it's like, I'm not formally, that's not something I'm formally educated in. I just do it, and it comes from within. And so I just tell them that I think the best thing is just to kind of study things. Recently, I was on a little webinar with some poets where one of the persons brought up, I can't remember the name of it exactly, morning something, like morning, like a morning journaling also, almost. Where, have you heard of this before? Where you get up in the morning and you just start writing about anything,
right?
And then it kind of leads you into becoming more creative or whatever. So I can't remember what they called it though. Morning something. It wasn't journaling. It was something else.
The way of dogging your creative capacities. I do that sometimes myself. I used to journal quite a bit. I don't do it as much as I used to, but I do write quite a bit otherwise.
Yeah.
Going back to the, you mentioned having a poem about sexual assault. I'm curious, it's a controversial subject, obviously, because people may not be as comfortable with it. Or how do you feel about approaching controversial subject matter as a poet? Should it be something, how should someone approach that?
Well, I think you need to approach it a little delicately. That particular one actually had a cuss word in it, one cuss word in it, but I needed it. I needed that in order to get the effect of the emotion behind it. I write very simplistically in my writing. I very much am a proponent of the beauty of simplicity. So in other words, I don't think, and some people write with big words, and I can use, educated words, but I usually write something that's within somebody's, they already know.
Right.
So I don't use a real complexity of words in my thing, ones that people are going to have to stop and look up in the dictionary, because then it takes away from the poem and it's become an unpleasant experience. So my thing is I can use simple language and tell my story. And
Right.
that's why I think I'm popular. But the thing is this, when you look at, like, for instance, music, does music have complex words in it? No, not really. And it you know, emotes you. It gets your emotions going. And if you look at movies, do most of them have complex verbiage and they emote us? So what I'm trying to say is that there can be beauty in the simplicity of just words in themselves, and how you are able to take those words and then bring someone's emotions to the surface. And I do that a lot, just by the simplicity of it. So it's how you're a word weaver. We're doing word art when we're doing poetry or writing. So I think it's really an art form that we use.
So both of us are Southerners. I wondered if they think there's like a Southern sensibility among writers in the South. I mean, there's a handful of actual Southern writers that are established, canonized, like Robert Penn Warren and people like that. Do you think there's a Southern sensibility in writing?
Well, I'm originally from the Midwest, so I'm originally from Iowa.
Oh, wow.
So
you found a difference, like a culture shock when you first came to Virginia?
Well, a little bit. I started having to mammon and all that stuff, and started saying things like "bless your heart" and things like that.
Well, bless your heart.
Bless your heart. But I've been here almost as long as I was in I've been here almost 30 years. So I'm almost 30 years, not quite there. So I won't tell you when I moved here, because then you can do the math and figure out how old I am. But I'm old because I got children that are in their 30s, later 30s. So but no, the South. Well, the Ned thing had a Southern thing to it.
Right, I think so.
And and so there's been a couple poems I've written kind of with this little Southern charm. So I actually like the South, and I like I think that they have a very strong sense of heritage that sometimes you don't always find in other parts of the country.
Right. I definitely think that it's possible that sensibility, and there's a community amongst the Southern people, people of Southern US, that there isn't as much maybe in other parts of the country.
Yeah.
I think we have a very common history, and it's very questionable history, definitely, in a lot of respects. But I think a lot of the problems we have now and nowadays are based in other parts of the country as well. I mean, would you agree with that? Or how does a poet handle history, a historical circumstance? How does a poet handle that?
Well, it's very controversial now, isn't it?
Yes.
If we're talking about a certain war, I kind of joked about it, because when I moved here, I tend to talk fast, so people think like I'm from up north somewhere instead of the Midwest, and they'll say, "You're a Yankee," and I had one guy that was very much, "You're a Yankee when you came here," and so I just kind of laughed it off, and I always kidded when I came here. I didn't even know what the Civil War was until I moved to the South,
right. Yeah, that's what I'm referring to. The very racial history.
Yeah. And you all are still fighting that Civil War. It's going to turn out the same. You do the reenactments, it's going to turn out the same every time. So,
Justice wins.
Yeah, I kid a lot. But, my ex-husband they were very much into the heritage of it. And, I'm kind of like, I'm from the Midwest, so I'm from farm country. So it doesn't.
Very conflicted, because people perceive it in different ways. I mean, you have some people that think this is a very violent conflict over slavery, and then there are people, of course, that see it a different way, as a form of heritage, or my people were involved in this and fighting this war. And it's very controversial for that reason, that a symbol that could be like a monument on a statue, for instance, there's a lot of conflict over that nowadays, very different meanings.
I think it was a liberating war, because look what happened. I mean, people got freedom out of it, which should have been, there in the first place. I'm very much, I don't care what color or what race or what religion anybody is. I just embrace people in general. So I've always tried to just love people for who they are. So I'm very embracing with all, cultures. I mean, as long as the people are good and they aren't, bad for some reason, and.
Yeah, very mean spirited or criminal, I would think
Yeah.
so. Yeah, that's how I try to do things as a humanist. I try to be more involved in people, and I learn more about people when I interact with them on the level that they're comfortable with.
Yeah.
Try
And
to
it's,
learn more
it's
from them.
interesting that we say that about the criminal thing, because I've done lots of things as a nurse, and I'm a nurse practitioner now. And one of the things that I've done as a nurse practitioner, I mean, I've done psych, I've done general medicine, but I also have done 3 correctional facilities,
Okay.
including the largest one in Virginia, and male one. And I can remember that the inmates liked me because I would treat them like a human.
Right.
And I learned to look at people differently, because I think when you're on the outside and you're looking at somebody who has been convicted of something, you don't know what it is. But there are a lot of people that are behind bars for lots of different reasons. And regardless, they're paying their time. So I really looked at people differently than as far as people who were incarcerated, and really humanized them. And they too have a story. So
A lot of them are victims themselves at some point. A lot of incarcerated people have suffered. Some of them are there for really trivial things,
yeah,
they just got caught and stuck somewhere in the wrong process of life, and they ended up in prison. And it happens to a lot of people.
and drugs, drug related things,
Yeah,
addiction and things like
never
that.
know. Right.
Yeah.
And really, I think that drug addiction shouldn't be criminalized. I'm a really big, believer in that, because it's a tough thing. And,
Well,
it's
drugs and
hard.
alcohol both are, people do it usually because they're self-medicating. Again, it's a mental health thing, usually depression or anxiety or whatever their woes of life. It's usually a way for them to self-medicate. And sometimes they get in the wrong crowd too, but generally speaking, if they've done it for a long period of time, they're trying to put a Band-Aid over something.
Yeah,
And
it's very sad to see that people suffer, things like that. I think if you go into the prisons and you teach writing, you teach them literacy, you teach them how to improve their lives. A lot of people come out and they work wonders for themselves. They start businesses, they improve their lives when they have the tools at hand.
do you know the poem Desiderata by Max Ehrmann?
Don't recognize it offhand.
It's a famous poem. It was written in 1927 or something like that by Max Ehrmann. It starts out like, go placidly amid the noise and haste. The whole thing's full of wisdom. Go placidly amid the noise and haste, and remember what peace there may be in silence. And, it talks about, people and their walks of life. But it
I
has
can
this piece.
recognize it now.
Yeah, it has a piece in there that I would say in psych, and I would say it to the prisoners.
Uh-huh.
And I would quote this: but do not distress yourself with dark imaginings. Many fears are born of fatigue and loneliness. And beyond a wholesome discipline, be gentle with yourself. You're a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here. And yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I know. I keep thinking I wish I would have written that, It's just this very impacting, insightful stuff. But the whole thing is full of that. And it has the thing, but do not feign affection, nor be cynical about love, for in the face of all aridity and disenchantment, it is as perennial as the grass. I mean, it's just got these great lines in it. So, yeah.
So we're going to wrap up the interview now. It's coming on a little time. So if you want to say a couple of shout outs to friends, family, people who supported you with your writing.
I would like to say hello to my friend Jill Sharon Kimmelman, which would be a great person for you to interview because she's a marvelous poet. But anyway, I would like to shout out to her and to all of my people at Passion of Poetry, both the members, and I have a marvelous admin team. We're very close and we work very well together. So I'd like to say hello to all of them. And, friends and family who have supported me, most of them, I'm just, Annette, or actually my nickname back home was Dee Dee. So, but hello to all them. And thank you very much for this opportunity.
You're very welcome, Annette. It's been a pleasure talking with you. This has been the New York Parrot Literary Corner. I'm Dustin Pickering. We had Annette Tarpley today. Thank you for joining us, Annette. And thank you for all our viewers out there. If anybody happens to have a few bucks to spare, we have a PayPal donation at paypal.me/nyparrot. So please feel free. Anybody out there viewing and who would like to donate. And we're looking for 1 million subscribers. We're doing our best to pursue the creative craft and all its various merits and its approaches. So if you also want to get in touch with us to view, to be on here on this program, just reach out. We're more than happy to put the platform up here for somebody who was interested in sharing their poetry as well as their other creative pursuits. Thank you for joining us again, Annette, and everyone should have a nice day today. I'm going to stop the recording now. Thank you very much.